Picture this. An American woman stands in a Sydney pharmacy, holding a tube of prescription-strength eczema cream, arguing with the pharmacist that her doctor's note from Michigan should work internationally because medicine is universal. She's created an entire thesis about how the Commonwealth should honor American prescriptions since we saved you in World War II, and insists she file a complaint with the International Pharmacy Board. The pharmacist, maintaining legendary Australian composure, simply says, "Ma'am, that's not a thing." The American pulls out her phone to Google this fictional organization, discovers it doesn't exist, and accuses the pharmacist of hiding behind bureaucracy, leaving the prescription cream behind, and posts on Facebook about Australia's socialist medicine conspiracy. Meanwhile, in Melbourne, an American tourist at the Queen Victoria Market touches every single piece of fruit, creating his own quality control system. Squeezing avocados, shaking melons, sniffing everything. The vendor watches silently until the American announces he's helping ensure quality standards. The vendor responds, "Mate, that's 47 pieces of fruit you've fondled and 0 you've bought. Either pick one or move on." The American explains he's educating himself on Australian agricultural standards and needs at least 20 more minutes. He's escorted away by market security, still clutching an oversqueezed mango. Shouting about consumer rights? These stories aren't just about culture shock, they're about what happens when American main character energy collides with Australia's absolute refusal to be impressed. If you're the kind of viewer who appreciates this level of cultural breakdown, the stuff most people never notice, you'll want to subscribe now. Because this is the standard I hold every single video to. An American family arrives at a North Queensland beach in January, sees everyone wearing full-body stinger suits, and decides this is fear-mongering by the wetsuit industry. The father announces he's from Florida, where we have real jellyfish, and marches into the water in board shorts. The lifeguard intercepts him, explaining that box jellyfish can literally kill him. The American responds with a detailed lecture about how jellyfish stings are just like bee stings, people overreact, and claims his extensive marine biology knowledge from watching Shark Week qualifies him to assess the danger. He demands to see peer-reviewed studies about box jellyfish lethality and suggests the lifeguard is probably paid by big stinger suit. The lifeguard, exhibiting the patience of someone who's had this conversation before, says, "Mate, I've seen what these things do. You can swim or you can survive. Pick one." The American reluctantly puts on a stinger suit, spends the entire beach day complaining about Australian paranoia, and later posts a 1-star review of the beach for mandatory unnecessary safety equipment. The local comments, "You're lucky you're alive to leave that review." Yeah, Drongo. This is the kind of cultural contrast most people completely miss. I track these patterns so you don't have to on. If you want this level of insight showing up before the algorithm buries it, subscribing is how you lock it. An American in Sydney refuses to use an Opal card for public transport because I shouldn't have to download an app or buy a special card just to use basic services. He boards a bus, tries to pay the driver cash, and is stunned when the driver says he can't accept it. The American escalates immediately, explaining that, in America, cash is legal tender and must be accepted for all debts and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Threatening to cite international commerce laws, creates an elaborate theory that cashless public transport is the first step toward social credit systems, and starts lecturing other passengers about financial freedom. The bus driver, completely unfazed, simply says, "Mate, no tap, no ride. Off you get." The American refuses to leave, claiming he's already on the bus, which constitutes acceptance of service. The driver pulls over, announces this bus isn't moving until he gets off, and suddenly 15 annoyed Sydneysiders turn on the American with the kind of coordinated irritation only morning commuters can achieve. He exits, ranting about mob rule, and spends 45 minutes at a 7-Eleven trying to figure out how to buy an Opal card. He later posts in a travel forum, "Australia is becoming a cashless dystopia. Wake up, sheeple." An American couple attends Adelaide Fringe Festival, expecting family-friendly street performances, and instead encounters experimental theater, boundary-pushing comedy, and artistic nudity. Rather than simply leaving, they launch a campaign claiming the festival engaged in false advertising. By not explicitly warning them it would be inappropriate for American values, they demand refunds, write to the South Australian Tourism Board, and attempt to organize a boycott. Their complaint letter includes phrases like misleading marketing to families and failure to disclose adult content. Despite the festival's very clear rating system, the festival director responds with quintessential Australian directness. The show was rated MA 15+, which was on the ticket, the website, and the venue entrance. What exactly did you expect from a show called Naked Truth, an intimate exploration? The couple insists the rating system should use American standards, and that MA 15 sounds like it could be educational. They leave Adelaide 2 days early, having filed formal complaints with 3 different government agencies, none of which respond. Their final Facebook post: Adelaide Fringe, beautiful city. Inappropriate culture. American man in Perth becomes obsessed with Australia's color-coded bin system: red for general waste, yellow for recycling, green for organic. Instead of simply using it, he photographs it extensively, takes measurements, announces he's going to bring this innovation back to America and patent it. He's genuinely convinced he's discovered something revolutionary that doesn't exist elsewhere. His neighbor, watching this unfold, finally says, "Mate, it's just bins." Every country's got 'em, the American explains his business model, involving licensing fees to American municipalities, and estimates he'll make millions from this Australian invention. Contacted a lawyer about intellectual property, rights for the tricolor waste management system, and has designed logos. When informed that color-coded recycling exists worldwide, including America, he pivots to claiming the specific shade of yellow is uniquely Australian and therefore patentable. He spends his last week in Perth measuring the Pantone values of wheelie bins with a color calibration app. He leaves convinced he's sitting on a gold mine, having filled an entire notebook with proprietary waste management research. An American tourist at a Tasmanian devil sanctuary becomes convinced he can predict exactly when the devils will eat based on animal behavior patterns. I've studied. He has no actual training, but has watched every episode of Zoo Confidential. He starts announcing feeding times to other tourists, contradicting the actual keeper's schedule, and insists his predictions are based on circadian rhythm science the facility is ignoring. When the devils are fed at the scheduled time, not his predicted time, he claims that keepers changed the schedule because I exposed their inconsistency. Approaches the facility manager with a full presentation on optimized feeding protocols that involves feeding the devils at sunset because that's when they'd hunt. Naturally, keeper explains. These are rescue animals on rehabilitation schedules designed by wildlife veterinarians. The American responds. But have those vets considered the moon phases? He's gently escorted out, still clutching his hand-drawn feeding charts, muttering about institutional resistance to innovation. He later leaves a review stating the facility refuses to implement proven scientific methods. An American snorkeler on a Great Barrier Reef tour notices some coral bleaching and immediately positions himself as the solution to climate change. Without any marine biology background, starts breaking off pieces of healthy coral to replant them in the damaged areas. Genuinely believing he's saving the reef, the dive instructor stops him, explaining that touching coral is illegal and damaging, that restoration is done by trained scientists. The American argues that doing nothing is worse than doing something and accuses the tour company of enabling environmental destruction through inaction. Convinced his common-sense approach is being suppressed by big reef tour bureaucracy, he proposes a detailed plan involving Home Depot supplies, underwater cement, and community volunteer days where tourists can adopt a coral. Instructor explains, "Mate, you'd be arrested. This is a protected marine park." The American interprets this as government overreach preventing grassroots environmentalism and films a video on the boat about Australia's backwards conservation. laws, he tags Greenpeace David Attenborough. And the Australian Prime Minister? The video gets 17 views, 14 of which are from bots. The absolute pinnacle of this phenomenon occurred in Darwin when an American man attempted to return a didgeridoo to a souvenir shop 3 days after purchase because it doesn't make the right sound. When asked what he meant, he explained he'd watched YouTube videos and expected a specific deep resonant tone. But his didgeridoo just makes weird honking noises. The shop owner asked if he'd practiced the circular breathing technique. The American responded, "I shouldn't have to learn a technique. A quality instrument should work immediately." He'd convinced himself that didgeridoos were like kazoo simpol blowongo. Instruments saying that this one was clearly defective. The shop owner, exercising restraint that should qualify for sainthood, explained, "Mate, the didgeridoo is a 40,000-year-old Aboriginal instrument requiring significant skill to play. You've had it for 3 days." The American pulled out his phone, showing Amazon reviews of beginner-friendly didgeridoos that anyone can play, and demanded this one be exchanged for an easier model. When told all didgeridoos require practice, he escalated to claiming this was discrimination against non-Aboriginal people and that gatekeeping traditional instruments was culturally problematic. He threatened to contact tourism authorities about false advertising of playable instruments to tourists. The owner, reaching peak Australian doneness, offered a full refund just to end the conversation. The American accepted, left the shop, and immediately bought another didgeridoo from a different store, convinced the first one was the problem. 2 days later, he was back at the second shop with the same complaint. He eventually left Darwin with 3 unplayed didgeridoos, 0 self-awareness, and a firm belief that Australian instrument manufacturing has serious quality control issues. Here's the thing about Australians. They've built an entire national identity around being unpretentious, practical, and absolutely allergic to taking themselves too seriously. So when Americans arrive with main character energy, treating every minor inconvenience like a TED Talk opportunity, and every cultural difference like a personal challenge to fix, Australians respond with the most devastating weapon in their arsenal: plight, bemused indifference. They're not trying to humble Americans. They're just genuinely confused by the amount of energy being expended on things that could be solved with, "Yeah, nah. Just do it this way." The beautiful irony is that Americans often interpret Australian laid-back attitudes as ignorance or lack of sophistication, not realizing they're being quietly laughed at by people who simply cannot fathom caring that much about bin colors, bus payment systems, or jellyfish suit aesthetics. Australia isn't trying to prove anything to anyone, which is exactly what makes the collision so spectacular.